back to Tempvs Watches. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about what's been going on in the world of watch prices. They've had a massive spike. There's been sort of talk of a slowdown. So I just wanted to go over a couple of the things that sort of first drove the spike and then subsequently have led to the softening of prices essentially. So the first thing to consider is the watch world doesn't operate in a vacuum. It is liable for price change by factors outside of its control. So you look at what's been going on in the world in the last couple of years. You've had Brexit, you've had COVID, you've had essentially the world is on fire, and this generally leads to different consumer habits. You've had the government as a solution to Brexit. They've been printing money left and right. What that's meant is more money in the pockets of the ordinary people, often, especially those who were generally well off to begin with, business owners, the middle class, those who've been able to take advantage of the government grants. Add to that the fact that they've not had to go into work, so they've saved on commuter costs. Generally speaking, they've had more money to spend on luxury items. We noticed that with the first round of bounce back loans, we had loads of customers looking to spend their cash. It's not really right, but it's not a small factor. It definitely drove up prices during the lockdown and probably in the subsequent months. You've also had in the last 4 or 5 years a steady increase in the prevalence of crypto in the market. So what that means is a couple of things. The first thing is obviously for people who earn their money in less than legitimate ways, it's a fantastic way for them to wash their money. So they could take their cash, somehow convert it to crypto and buy a watch, or buy a watch outright and then sell it for crypto. It allows them to buy luxury, high-value items without ever having to be accountable to the taxman or to the government. And because watches are such a great transportable item, it's far more interesting for those people than things like gold. Things like diamond wear forgeries are. If you're an expert, it's hard. Unless you're an expert, rather, it's hard to know what you're buying. Artwork, properties, all those sorts of things are difficult. So crypto's definitely helped boost that in some respects. You've also had societally a shift away from cash. So more and more businesses are refusing to take cash. The government makes it harder and harder to pay in cash and withdraw cash. And with that, you've got a sizable chunk of the country who've got cash reserves. Whether that's 5,000 or 50,000 or more, they've got to put that somewhere. And watches are a fantastic option. Generally safe, and as and when they sell the watch down the line, because it's a chattel, it's a wasting chattel, there would be no tax to pay. So long as it's a plausible story. I mean, you're not gonna buy a 200 grand watch for cash and then the next month sell it by transfer and then the bank asks you where you got it from. But for 5, 10, 20,000 pound watches, it certainly is plausible. There's a few other things as well. So you've got the lockdown has given a lot of people time. So you find sort of increased investment in apps like eToro and Trading 121. You've also had people searching about watches. Watches have grown steadily for well over a decade now. So for people who had never previously thought of it as an investment avenue, that's changed. Quite apart from people jumping on the bandwagon, they've done their homework. They've seen that watches are a good and stable investment. Certainly outstripping inflation in some cases, 10, 15, 20% a year growth. I mean, it's genuinely a very good investment portal. If you buy well, of course, and not every watch does that, but if you buy well and you buy pre-owned, by and large, in the medium term, you stand to make a decent amount of money. You've also had huge supply chain issues. So COVID and Brexit have wrought havoc on production lines across the world. So it's not just watches, phones, cars, properties. Everything around the world has slowed down because there's no raw materials, there's no staff to do the work. Couriering goods across borders is increasingly difficult. And what that's done is, as the demand's grown and the supply's shrunk, inevitably the price jumps. So there's not a great deal that could have been done to prevent that. And when you add all these factors together, the net result is increased watch prices. It's not rocket science to understand why it's done that. Now, what's changed in the last couple of months? There's a few things that's changed. So 10-20% month growth, it's not sustainable. I don't care who you are, what business you're in, that's not sustainable. At some point that slows down, and that's what's happened. There's not really been a crash. Actually, if you look at across all the metrics and all the watches that are available, there's been a softening. I mean, it's jumped 70, 80, 50, 60%, bounced back 5 to 10% maybe. It's not bounced back anywhere near half. And even then, you're talking about 5 models, 10 models per brand, if that. It's a comparatively tiny fraction that's bounced back. And it's generally the watches that have been hyped up the most that have come down a little bit. So on that issue of hype, so you've got watch dealers essentially blowing their own trumpets, hyping up watches, pumping the watches out on Instagram. Buy now, prices are going up, don't miss out. And they're essentially whipping hysteria up, and they did it with several models. You guys know what they are as well as I do. But what this has done is as soon as there was a slight slowdown or a correction, all these dealers who'd been hyping up these watches are suddenly left with these watches and no customers to buy them, or certainly no customers at that price. And because a lot of these dealers are new dealers, they've got no experience, they've got no heritage, and a lot of them don't have deep enough pockets to hold, they crash the watches. So what they would do is a £50,000 watch, because they need liquidity, they'd sell it for 45 or 44, 46. And then the next person buying will say, oh, hold on, if that one's for 46, maybe I shouldn't be paying more than 42, so he'll buy it for 42, and so on and so forth. And it doesn't take much for that buying pattern to set in. For me, it's a good thing, because there's too many fly-by-night dealers. Every day we're walking down the street, we're seeing new dealers. On Instagram, there's anybody with a smartphone's a dealer now. And it's a little bit exhausting, because it's frustrating, because customers essentially end up getting the short end of the straw. They don't do well buying from dealers who have been established for 6 months, if that, who don't have an email address. You can't pay them by bank transfer or debit card. Their details on Companies House are sketchy at best, and they've got a Gmail or a Hotmail email account. It's not great that these people exist, but eventually they'll get weeded out, or they'll become more established, in which case this is just step one in their journey. You've also got real world issues affecting the price. So the Russian war with Ukraine has massively impacted on things in a couple of ways. So the first and most obvious one we noticed in London, may not be so obvious elsewhere, but the Russian buying power dried up. So Russian tourists, wealthy Russians visit London in the thousands every year, and they spend fortunes, much like the Gulf Arabs. It's a big chunk of the market, and them not being here is a problem. Compounded with that is that they've not only not been buying, they've been actively selling, because obviously many of them have had frozen assets. So you've had a shortage of cash, an influx of their watches, has definitely created a ripple. As well as that, whenever there's a war, there's a shaky consumer confidence. It's natural. House prices, gas prices, energy prices, everything gets affected when there's a war, especially one that's so close to the borders, relatively speaking. So these aren't small things to ignore. You've had in the last 6 months, you've had hour-long queues to get petrol. You've had energy bills doubling, council tax 20-30%, and salaries largely remained stagnated. So all these cost of living crises impact. Now, it hasn't crashed, which tells you everything you need to know about the robust nature of the industry. It is still an incredibly strong business. Watches of Switzerland reported record numbers. Rolex, AP, Omega, Longines, all of the big powerhouses are still doing incredibly well. Watchfinder has grown year on year. Chrono 24's numbers are up. The industry itself is fundamentally very strong. And for us, because we do predominantly in older discontinued models, we've not really noticed a slowdown. The newer stuff, yes, for sure. Not a price dump, but a slowdown. where we might have 5 inquiries a day for a new root beer or a sky dweller, we might now get 1 or 2. We're certainly getting offered more, but that's largely to do with the fact that everybody now is a watch dealer. So everybody who buys anything from Rolex, the first thing they do, rather than put it on their wrist, is they put it on Chrono24, or they call half a dozen shops to try to sell it. And eventually, when you do that enough, it impacts on the price. It's just normal. In any case, it's important to understand what's going on so that you can navigate where you're going. A lot of people I know, they're holding their money, they're not buying just yet, they think the market's going to go further down. I think if you found a good piece, buy it. Because even if the price dips a little bit more on certain models, in time they'll bounce back. I would never recommend paying triple and quadruple retail, unless it's a watch you desperately want. But if you're a watch enthusiast and there's a 90s sub, or there's a really nice Patek that you like the look of, and you're able to afford it and you think it's a sound investment, buy it. There's no point in holding forever, because at some point you're going to miss the boat. It's happened a lot. Do your homework, buy from sensible dealers, buy from reputable sources, and generally you'll be okay. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and stay tuned for more videos.